Hi, and welcome to Long Live the Queen, where we talk about the women who made history. And by we, I mean the royal we, because it's just me. Today we're going to talk about Elizabeth Blount. Usually it's just me, but today I have my cousin Katie with me. Hi, Katie.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I'm freezing my tush off. I'm up visiting Washington from the warm state of Texas, and it is chilly.
Chilly.
I'm ready to go back. Yeah, I'm ready to go back. It was 75 when I left. It is
You brought the bad weather
42.
with you.
No, it came before I did. It
Okay.
came before me. I did not bring a tornado with me.
that's that's good, because we don't need more of those. I was joking that
No.
Wicked was in town. So I was like, that must be why we had the cyclone, the random
Yep.
Washington cyclone. Okay, so we're going to talk about Elizabeth Blount. So Elizabeth
Okay.
Blount was born around 1500, and we don't know for sure. So anytime we talk about her age, you have to take it with a grain of salt. Around 1500, that's the best guess. But there is a range. But we have reasons for thinking she's this age because of various milestones that happened in her life. It makes sense that she would be born in 1500. Her father was a knight of the realm, so they were gentry, so think upper middle class. They were privileged, but not noble. But they were privileged enough to hang out with the nobles. They would go to tournaments, and gentry could on occasion marry nobles. So they would intermingle, but they weren't noble themselves. When Elizabeth Blount was about 8 years old, the King of England died, King Henry VII, who was the first Tudor king.
King Henry's dad.
Yes.
Okay.
Making his 17-year-old son, Prince Harry, King Henry VIII of England.
Okay.
So Bessie's about 8, King Henry is 17. And this would have been pretty exciting for 8-year-old Elizabeth. There was grand celebrations for the new King Henry, including his marriage to Princess Catherine of Aragon. So there was a new king, a royal wedding, a whole lot of stuff was going down in England. When Elizabeth was about 15 or 16, she was sent to court to attend Queen Catherine. So she got a job, her first job, and it was a good job. She was attending the Queen, and she was young. She was 15 or 16. So she would have been like a junior lady's maid, probably. But she would have helped Catherine get dressed in the morning and just gotten her whatever she needed throughout the day, and kind of like a professional friend, hang out with her when she isn't busy. In 1516, so when Elizabeth was about 16, the queen was pregnant for at least the fifth time. And none of the queen's previous babies had survived, nearly a decade into their marriage, and people were starting to notice. The king wanted an heir, preferably a male heir, very badly. The queen's on her fifth pregnancy, and she's just like, please let this one work. She's getting pretty desperate at this point, too, because that's a lot of pregnancies to not have any babies.
Yeah. Sad.
Yeah. And during this pregnancy, the king would have been pretty hands off on the queen because he wasn't trying to mess up this pregnancy either. The general idea is once they're pregnant, just no sudden movements, no loud noises, just cross your fingers and pray. But he,
Mm,
he wasn't going to be celibate. That wasn't going to happen. So he was definitely sleeping with other people.
gotta get your rocks off.
Yeah, the 25-year-old king was likely looking for women amongst his friends' ladies because they're there, they're convenient, they're loyal to the family,
They're in the castle.
they're right there. And that seems to be his type. And that seems to be around the time when he noticed 16-year-old Elizabeth Blount. So he's about 25, she's about 16. His wife's pregnant, and they
Naturally.
started spending time together. And Elizabeth would have served the queen throughout her pregnancy, but as a childless female, she probably wouldn't have been at the birth of this baby because they weren't
What does
trying
she
to
know?
talk teenage girls out of becoming pregnant. So they're like, no, you don't have to see that. Like, your first experience with childbirth would be when you had your own
Yours.
baby. Yeah. So when the queen had this baby, and this baby was Princess Mary, and she survived. She was a girl, so bummer. But she was a living girl, a healthy living girl. And she ended up being the only surviving child of King Henry VIII and Queen Catherine. So Elizabeth was about 16 when Henry had his daughter. So the queen's baby was a girl, and the queen was 31, and she had one living baby after 5 pregnancies. So it wasn't looking great. Like, maybe she could get pregnant a couple more times, but she didn't have the best track record with those. So it's possible they
This
were
could
just
be
having the one girl.
right. This could be their one and done situation.
Yes. King Henry became very interested in proving that this no boy thing was not God's judgment of him. Because everyone was like, oh, look at, he just has a one daughter. God must hate this guy. And he's like, no, no, no. He might hate my wife. It might not be me. And that became like his
I'm
main
not the problem.
pastime. Like, God loves me. I'm the king. I wouldn't be the king if God didn't love me.
Poor Henry.
Yes. So while he was working on an heir with his wife, he was also enjoying recreation time with various other ladies, but specifically with the young Elizabeth Blount, who wouldn't have much say in it, but also he's a charming 25-year-old, athletic, tall, good-looking king.
Right. I was going to
She,
say this was before he had like his weeping wound
mm-hmm.
and before he
He's
went
athletic.
totally
He's
side.
basically the Travis Kelce of then. He's like tall
Right.
and handsome and athletic and yeah. So
Actually looks good.
yeah, she probably wouldn't have had a problem with it, but she was, I mean, we have to keep in mind she was only 16, which at that time would have been considered an adult, but
Right.
there's a huge difference between
16.
16 and 25.
Right. And there's not probably not she probably didn't have much say in it being that he's the king.
Yeah, I mean, yes would have been her
Like
only answer that would have been acceptable. So
right.
she had no say in it. But he's
Right. And
not
this has been
the old man at this point with wounds
the
and
old
yeah.
the old nasty man.
Hmm.
And he isn't in his for the head era yet.
No, not yet. He has not beheaded a single wife. He hasn't even left a wife. He's on his first wife. And she
Ah,
is just the girl he's sleeping with who works for his wife.
to be young and in love
Yeah.
or
When
not.
when Princess Mary was about 2.5, her mother was expecting again. Unfortunately, this pregnancy also ended with a stillborn daughter. So, bummer. It was a girl and she didn't survive. But there was some good news for the king, not the queen. Teenage Elizabeth was in the early stages of her pregnancy also, with a baby of the king, when the queen miscarried this baby. So this would have been awkward. Elizabeth was an unmarried teenager, but she was with child, and it wouldn't take very much effort to figure out who the father of that baby was. She didn't see that many men. She was with the queen most of the time.
So how did they deal with that?
Well, so the question was put forth to the king, like, well, how do you want to deal with this? Like, what do you want to do? And he said,
Okay.
I don't know. I guess we'll see if the baby's a boy. I don't need any more
Oh.
daughters.
Oh,
And of
okay.
course, there's no way to know that until the baby's born.
Right.
So she was sent off into
Oh,
uncomfortable castle, a lonely castle probably, because ain't nobody want to find out that she's pregnant with the king's baby. But everything she needed would be provided for her while they just waited and hoped it was a boy. Because if it was a boy, the king might recognize this baby. If it was a girl,
okay.
you're on your own. Not happening.
Right. Right.
One of the queen's other ladies was also pregnant. Maria Salinas was pregnant with her daughter, Catherine Willoughby, from your last episode. So that's the time period we're in.
Ah, okay.
We're right before your last episode starts. Catherine is almost born. Maria was about 3 months farther along in her pregnancy than Elizabeth Blount was. But
Okay.
her husband was probably the father of her baby, so she didn't have to be sent away because she was a
Amen.
married gal. She's allowed to be pregnant. At some point, Elizabeth's pregnancy became hard to hide, and that's likely when she would have been sent away, whenever it started to look like she was obviously pregnant. And everyone just waited. Like, is it going to be a boy? I guess we'll see. It was kind of just waiting in limbo. While she was away, Maria Salinas had her baby, Catherine, and named her after the queen in March of 1519. So we're at the beginning of your last episode now. Catherine
Okay.
Willoughby is born. And just 3 months later, 19-year-old Elizabeth gave birth to her baby, a surviving little boy, King Henry VIII's
Oh,
first surviving son.
okay.
And the king was thrilled. Fuck the haters, the patriarchy won. Mic drop. The king was like, I nailed it. The King of England
God
had
does love me.
Yeah, the King of England had proved that God was on board with him having a son. It was his wife that God was mad at all along, in
Even
his
though
mind.
even though it was out of wedlock with a chick,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
could not make your own
No, God's like,
decisions.
see, make things
But
clear.
I'm
You can have a boy with your mistress,
but
because
not
I
your
hate your
wife.
wife. That's
Right.
It was all very black and white back then. They were sure that they could tell what God
So
wanted based on things like the gender of your baby.
right. Oh.
So Queen Catherine was hurt. Not only had her husband had a baby with a teenager, but they had a living boy, and on their first try. So,
So with her first 5 pregnancies with before Mary, were any of them boys, or do we not
yes,
know?
one of them was a boy
Okay.
who lived almost a month.
Okay.
Or actually, no, I think he lived a little over a month. He was born the 1st of January and he died the beginning of February. So, some of them had been boys, some of them she miscarried too early to know. I think
Okay.
at least two of them were boys, and only one survived past birth, and he, like I said, he lived to be like, I don't know, 40 days or something.
Okay.
So they did for about a month have a little boy. There were celebrations and everything, but then he died, and they were like, oh, bummer.
Hmm.
And her husband was owning it. The baby was named Henry Fitzroy, and that means Henry, son of the king. That's Fitzroy just means son of the king. So
Okay.
his name is Henry, son of the king. So he was like, yeah, this is my kid, and I'm naming him after me, and his last name's going to be son of the king, because he's definitely mine. And Elizabeth Blount was the blessed teenager who had provided him with his proof that he had not been at fault ever, and it had been the Queen's fault all along that they couldn't get an heir.
Right.
And it was that time period where he was keeping the options open to get this son legitimized. Like, it was clearly not legitimized. He's married to someone else when he has this baby with Elizabeth, but if he recognizes this baby from birth and has it raised royally, then there's always a chance that they could legitimize him and make him the king.
Got it. Like if Catherine adopted him, like would it be a thing, or like
No, no, they would just say he's legitimate.
okay,
Yeah, like
okay,
maybe the Pope would say, okay, well, I get that you need a son, and you had a son. Unfortunate
got it.
about his mother, but let's count him anyway.
Right. Okay.
So he threw grand celebrations for the birth of his and Elizabeth Blount's son. His wife congratulated him on the birth of his son, and he named the son Henry, which was the same name her son had had that had lived. Oh, I have it in my notes here. Her son had lived a short 52-day life.
Okay.
And
So
this
he
baby
did.
has the same name as him.
Oh, sweet.
Although he would have been Prince Henry. And this
Right.
baby was Henry Fitzroy, which is just a fancy way of saying not technically a prince, but son of the king.
Right.
And none of her other sons were named, as they hadn't lived long enough to acquire one, or her daughters either. So little Henry, that lived 52 days, and Princess Mary are the only two that got names.
Okay.
During this time, Elizabeth, or Bessie as she was known by, she was also celebrated. A common saying during this time was, bless ye Bessie Blount. And she
Okay.
had saved the king's reputation and boosted the morale of the entire country. She was not the king's whore. This was not an Anne Boleyn situation. This was like,
Okay.
She's basically the virgin mother who just showed up at court and had the king's baby. That's how they're
Nice.
seeing her. Yeah.
That would
This
be
was
that would
her
be
15 minutes of fame for sure.
okay.
She was the celebrated mistress of the king, despite the fact that his wife was very beloved. Everyone loved Queen Catherine. So it's tricky to
That's so
be the popular mistress to the husband of the
right.
popular queen.
Especially when you're like, because I'm assuming she's still. I'm assuming. I am assuming that she was still working for the queen at this point, or not
Yeah,
really. Like
after
she
she had her
was.
baby and her baby was recognized, then she came back to court, and yes, now she's working for the queen, kind of. She's more elevated at court. She's not junior lady in waiting anymore. She's 19 now. She's
Okay.
at
And
court, but you might say she's closer with the king than the queen at this point.
right. Well, and she's the blessed, not the blessed mother, but
Yes.
blessed Bessie.
Yeah, and the queen she had just had her moment of, like, she has a living child now, and like, oh, and then Bessie just comes along and has a boy. Like,
Right.
steals her thunder,
Is-
kinda.
But Mary's two.
Mary's, yeah, 2.5, 3 at this point.
Okay.
You could say that Bessie had peaked at 19. She's 19, she's the mother of the king, she's the king's baby mama.
Okay.
She was gentry, now her son is going to be made a noble. So she's not noble, but her son will be, probably. And
Okay.
maybe sensing this, or maybe just accepting her reward for a living son, the king arranged a marriage for the young Elizabeth Blount, like as a reward. Basically, I don't have another word. Like, yay, you gave me a boy. Here's a husband.
Okay.
So 20-year-old Elizabeth Blount was married to 23-year-old future baron and friend of King Henry, Gilbert Talboys.
Okay.
She was going to be a baroness, so she was now going to be a noble. But she didn't get to keep custody of her son.
No, of course not, because that
Bec-
would just make life too easy.
yeah, the king recognized him, meaning the king would take care of everything, including where he lived, how he was raised, who his governesses were, who his wet nurses were, who his teachers were. And Elizabeth would marry her husband and then start having babies with him. So she kind of just moved on from that first part of her life and started a second part of her life. And she would have still gotten to see her son because she was still on good terms with the king. But the king
Okay.
had full custody. She was just, please, can I come visit him? And if the king said yes, she could.
Got it.
So while she was with her husband, she had a daughter named Elizabeth, named after her, in 1520, George in 1523, and Robert in 1528. So slow and steady. Every 3 to 5 years, she would have another baby. And her husband worked for the king. He was like basically what she used to do for the queen, her husband now did for the king. So she was still at court, but now she's a mother of the friend. She's the mother of the king's baby, but she's also the wife of the king's friend and the mother of his babies too.
Okay.
The following year, her husband was invested a baron, and Bessie was officially Baroness Elizabeth Talboys. So she wasn't gentry anymore. She was an official noble lady. She was moving up in the world. A proper lady.
Moving on up.
And at this point, she had a 10-year-old son with the king. And the king had made him the Duke of Richmond and Somerset. So he was a big deal. He was a duke times two, which is the highest noble you can be without being royal. The only upgrade from that would be if he got legitimized and became a prince.
Okay.
So he was still a pretty big deal and still the king's only surviving son. Baroness Elizabeth had her 3 children living with her, 9-year-old Elizabeth, 6-year-old George, and 1-year-old Robert. And she was Baroness for about a year. But then
Oh.
her husband Gilbert died at the age of just 33.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know of what. I'm kind of just, when a healthy man at 33 just dies, I assume it's dysentery or sweating
Yeah.
sickness or just some illness that came out of nowhere. But we don't know what he died of. Bessie was a little off the radar now. The focus was more on her 10-year-old son, the Duke, than her. So we don't have a lot of stuff written about them at this point.
Got it.
But that meant her oldest son, was Baron Talboys at just the age of 7 because her kids were still
And that
young.
Okay, so that's her. That was this. What was his
Her
name?
oldest son with her husband.
Yeah, but what was his name?
His name was
Not
George.
George. Okay, I was like, not Robert.
No, Robert's the baby. Yeah, so George is now bearing tailboys at the age of just 7. So during this time, the king had decided that he was going to throw his first wife away. She was banished. He was like, she's not
Okay,
doing her job. Her only job was to have a boy, and this random teenager did it, but she can't do it. So he was working on ending his marriage and spending time with his new mistress, Anne Boleyn, who was probably about 1 year younger than Bessie Blount.
okay,
They're contemporaries. And he first started this by trying to convince the Pope to annul his marriage to Catherine because he had started his career, the king had started his career as a hopeful clergyman. So he had some church knowledge, just enough to make a case, but not enough to convince the Pope. So the Pope was like,
got
no,
it.
you got to keep this wife. And so he just banished her, and
And
he's like, maybe she'll die or give up or something.
okay,
A year after Bessie's husband died, her father also died. And that meant that no one was really in charge of her anymore. Except what?
she was a wealthy chick. She was a wealthy chick,
She
rich
was
bitch that
she
every.
was she was a wealthy widow. A young wealthy widow. You know the drill. Part 2 is on Patreon, and the link for Patreon is in the show description. See you there.
Will be remembered.
Thanks for listening.